Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's presentation, Overlooked No More, Iceland's Arctic Tern, is brought to you by NatHab Expedition Leader Daniel Blankenheim. Daniel holds a master's degree in wildlife ecology and management from Vienna and has conducted research on brown bears and human-wildlife conflict in northern Greece, as well as wild bonobo habituation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. As a certified paddle sports leader, he's navigated some of the world's most challenging waters, from New Zealand's rough seas to Canada's Class 3 whitewater rapids, and completed a remarkable 40-day canoe expedition on the Hard River in the Yukon. Daniel combines his scientific expertise in landscape and wildlife ecology with extensive guiding experiences across multiple continents, from eco lodges in Thailand to wilderness expeditions in remote locations. Wow, Daniel, that sounds amazing. Thanks for being here with us today. Yeah,
Yeah,
the show's yours, sir.
thank you so much, Rob. That was certainly a very warm and kind representation. Thank you and introduction. I really appreciate it. I hope I'm going to do the same justice to the Arctic Tern that we will talk about today. It's been on my mind for a long time to do a webinar about the Arctic terns, and I would like all of our guests today to understand the reason why. And probably it has a lot to do with the puffins. Okay, so I'm guiding these Iceland trips since 2023, and everybody's crazy about the puffins, me included, right? Because they are fabulous, no doubt about that. I've been doing a webinar also on puffins, so don't get me wrong, I love puffins, absolutely. But I kind of get frustrated when I point out these wonderful Arctic terns, and I'm like, oh my God, there's Arctic terns. Oh, there's some more. And nobody even bats an eye or looks at them. And that's because I think knowledge is key here, right? Because once we understand how incredibly these animals are, then we care about them, then we start protecting them. That's the whole idea of our trips, right? And so today I want to shed a little bit of more light on these Arctic terns. That's so next time when any of you visits Iceland or any of these places where you can see Arctic terns, you have a little bit more appreciation for them. And it might even inspire you to take a photo of them or take home some precious memory and share these stories with your loved ones. So how we're going to do this today is I give you a little bit of introduction about also us as a company and myself, even though Rob has done such a good job doing that. That's going to be very quick. And then I want you to meet Thomas the Tern. So we go through his different life stages, the life of Thomas. And we focus on one aspect in particular, because that's the most important one. That's the very special one, the standout aspect when it comes to Arctic terns. That's their migration. And then we focus more and more on the Arctic terns in Iceland and their population, how they are doing, how we can see them even on some of our trips. And then we'll go into the conservation and some of the issues that are related to the population and to them in Iceland. Before I leave you with some awesome facts, so you can linger on the feeling and be like inspired and feel, wow, oh, so good stuff that I learned today. Learning can be fun. That's exactly what I'm trying to achieve today. So first of all, Natural Habitat Adventures. We are celebrating our anniversary, our birthday, 40 years now, and our mission has been since day one to protect our planet by inspiring travelers, just as I've been describing, turning you into informed ambassadors for these places that we visit to help protect them. And in doing so, we not only support the wild places and the wildlife that is there, but also the local communities in a very sustainable way. And so that's one of the main cores of our philosophy, to go to these places and benefit not only the wilderness, but also the communities thriving in them. We do so by boldly influencing the entire travel industry. That starts already with zero waste trips, but also goes to more and more electrical safari vehicles, for example, in Peru and Botswana. So I'm really proud how seriously the company is taking these things and continuously improves on them. And I think this effort was recognized by the World Wildlife Fund in 2003, when our partnership began with kind of the same goal in mind, to protect these wild places. And so over the years, since 2014, we have been exclusive, further rewarding that kind of ingrained philosophy in our approach to travel. And over the years, we've managed to donate more than 8.5 million directly to the WWF, while we've inspired people like you, our guests, to donate more than 50 million to 2,000 projects worldwide, making a huge difference. And I think that's exactly the philosophy that actually got me to work with Natural Habitat Adventures. I was in Iceland already when I came, because I've always been in love with large mammals, mostly because they're so intelligent and the interaction means so much to me. And that's why I was in Iceland as a whale watching guide already. I was guiding for Natural Habitat Adventures in Portugal already before that. And so I was introduced to Iceland. I spent some of my pastime there now, some of my summer month in particular, before it gets too miserable and dark. And that's exactly the time of the year when we get to see these Arctic terns in their breeding frenzy, in their plumage. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. So thanks again for the warm welcome and the great introduction. And so now it's up to us to meet Thomas, the little tern, starting very young and early here. You can see, if you can see, because the camouflage is quite well, right? I mean, in the grass, these kind of shaped egg doesn't really get to see anything. It's tiny, really tiny eggs, and basically well camouflaged, but they're just about 1.5 to 2 inches large. So really tiny eggs. And probably a normal brood, let's say. His parents done a great job, selected a good place. We will talk about more of these in a little bit, but probably just 1 to 2 to 3 eggs, and Thomas is one of them. And then after about 3 weeks, he will hatch and be ready for some adventures. So look at this little downy feather ball. Not much yet going on, although the eyes are open already. The exploration actually begins very, very early. So even within 1 to 3 days, little Thomas starts walking around, exploring the surroundings, and it's a very important stage, right? This is where basically it's decided if he's going to make it or not. So this is where the parents continue to feed the little Thomas for about a month, maybe 5 weeks, maybe a little bit around that time, 4 to 5 weeks, let's say. And so it's shared duties. Both parents will take turns feeding him, and it's going to take just about 3 to 4 weeks before he's turning into a beautiful juvenile that is already ready to go for a long migration. And we're really talking a long migration here. Like I said, I'm not going to go into details so much right now because that's going to come later, but keep in mind, basically after 3 weeks old, this guy is going to go on one of the longest migration ever. It's about 14,000 miles, making all the way down to Antarctica, where the little tern is going to stay for the first winters, okay, just being down there. And eventually, he's going to make his way back up again, okay? So in his 3rd or 4th summer, he's ready. The hormones are growing, and oh my God, there's love birds flying all around. And so Thomas decides to come back, makes up his whole journey again, and arrives in Iceland again. And there he meets, let's call her Tanya. Why not? Tanya, look at that. Beautiful. They both start caring about each other. But how does he actually get her attention? Well, that's something we call high flight. So basically, the male shows agility. Thomas just swooping around, flying around the female, trying to impress her. Because as in humans, agility kind of shows fitness, right? So it actually trying to impress the females. Another stage maybe is the very famous fish flight, where he flies low over the colony with a fish-filled bill pointed downwards, just to grab the attention of Tanya, just to make her fall in love with him, and showing off what a great provider he could be for future offspring. So that really helps. Okay, let's say Tanya is really buying it and she's in love already. And then the courtship basically continues on ground, and it involves a raised tail, a puffed chest, making him look big and important, really healthy. And eventually there might be some more body language cues, parallel walking might be involved. So all kinds of things that cement the pair bond. But there's even more than that. The offering doesn't finish here. Thomas has to continue to offer fish to Tanya to cement the pair bond, so that for sure they will stick around in the breeding season, because it's a really tough job. And so for a long time, basically since the 80s, when the first studies came out, the species was believed to be really monogamous, and we want to believe in the true love story of Tanya and Thomas here. But in reality, like in most things in biology, it's much more complicated than that, right? And so keep that in mind. I will come back to that after the whole migration thing, because it has a lot to do with the complication. Long distance relationships are always a bit tricky, so I will come back to that. But keep in mind, for now, we believe in the true love story between Thomas and Tanya. So basically, after 3 to 4 years, when they're doing this, they agree on the nest site. So we're going back to in their summer month, in their breeding plumage. They're still in Iceland now, and now they need to find a good nesting place. And what does that mean? It means trying to avoid predation whenever possible. So traditionally, they picked some remote islands where they couldn't go, some barren beaches, not easily accessible, because they're ground breeders. Okay, so they have their nest just between some rocks. You've seen the grassy patches, you've seen some moss. Some of that might be arranged a little bit also once they're in the nest, but both of them basically agree on the nest side, while the guy, or Thomas, is usually the one initiating the one and setting up a little bit of a nest, just creating a little bit of a shallow, let's say, for her to start. And if she accepts, then the copulation will start. Then they start laying their 1 to 3 eggs, and they will share the incubation duties like in a real modern family. Okay, so pretty cool. 3 weeks until he hatches. He's getting his first offspring. Super happy, the family. I hope they all gonna make it. It's not that easy. It's actually very tricky. Only about 0.5, even lower, is the survival rate of or we could say the offspring per couple is 0.5, even less than that. So over a summer, not even one couple into only one couple in 2 is going to make it. So it's a bit tricky. It depends a lot on prey availability, and that leads to the success and or failure of the breeding season. So it's a lot of things. But during that time, when they are fishing and when they're trying to feed their offspring, Thomas and Tanya become very protective parents. That's another standout aspects that I want you to keep in mind, because it's very, very famous, especially when you come on an Iceland trip with us. Probably that's where Alfred Hitchcock got his inspiration from for his movie about the birds attacking the civilians and being all kind of crazy. What a horror movie idea. I'm sure he was somewhere in the northern countries and experienced the Arctic terns attacking them, because that's just what they do. Because they are ground breeders, right? The nest on the bird. It's easy to just go on a piece of grass and basically walk right into their breeding grounds, and then it's not fun for them. So they're gonna swoop down on you, they're gonna attack you, they're gonna dive bomb. It's very well documented, even on Icelandic golf courses, that they're gonna do it. So you're in for an adventure for that. They're always gonna attack the highest point. So what some of these golfers do is to use a club and put it up on top of their heads just to protect them from these fierce attacks of the Arctic tern, protecting their youngs, right? I mean, good on them for being so protective, but definitely quite a sight to behold, because they are not fearful at all. You can see that even here in the polar bear. This is in Svalbard, and they're just diving down on him. Just no rest for this poor guy, just trying to find an extra bite, some extra protein here. And you can see even the bloody nose, and the bears chased away the polar bear, while the Arctic terns remain, just protecting their young ones. Really unafraid, really incredible how protective they are. The top predator, apex predator, and just chased away by some Arctic terns. So don't mess with these guys. They mean business to protect their young ones. This is actually happening a bit more often now, unfortunately, because of climate change. It used to be much more common for polar bears to be on the ice, right, all year long. But since the ice is melting so quickly, they find themselves on these remote islands, where they are now in contact with Arctic tern colonies, which usually or traditionally didn't happen as much. There's one other thing, though. We talked about them being quite bullies, right? The Arctic terns protecting their young ones, but they are famous for kleptoparasitism, and that means that they're basically harassing other birds to drop prey so that they can get them in midair, or even collect them and scoop them from the water surface, basically benefiting from other animals' work, so other birds hunting efforts. But they are themselves victims of that when it comes to the Arctic skua. Okay, the Arctic skua, parasitic Jäger, is probably the North American name that is more familiar for you. They are called that way because they're doing exactly that. So even the bullies that the Arctic terns are, even fearless as they are, they're being attacked by a lot of Arctic skuas during the breeding season, trying to steal fish from them. So it's quite a chase to behold as well. So here's Thomas as a very handsome adult, and look, it's strikingly beautiful, this white plumage, usually a little bit of gray variation in there. We have a wingspan of about 26 to 30 inches. And that is quite a high ratio in comparison to the body language. And that, of course, helps with gliding and easily flying. You can see the striking red beaks and red legs, and that is a standout feature as well, while it has this beautiful black cap also. Female and males basically look the same for us. There's no easy way to tell them apart. And even with other terns, it's almost impossible to see them, to differentiate between them when they're in breeding plumage. But we will look at another species later on, and maybe I can point out some differences. But for now, focus on the forktail, right? Very, very strong forktail, beautiful. And we also have what's really striking, what you can't necessarily see on this photo, is that they're very light. Okay, when we talk about very light, we mean 100 grams or just about 3.5 ounces. And so it's basically an empty wine glass, or let's say 3.5 slices of toast. So I checked that out. So try it out. It's really, really incredibly light. And of course, that's so important for the migration that we will still talk about. But what do they do for hunting? What does Thomas do in his adult life? Well, of course, he's going to go hunting. And how? It's pretty impressive if you get to see it. He hovers like a falcon over open oceans, over streams, lakes, everywhere where he can basically find small little fish species. And these might be 1 to 2 year old immature fish species like herring, cod, capelin, and most importantly, sand eels or sand lances. They're not really eels, they're also fish, but they're just very tiny, longish fish, and I think that's why they're called sand eels. So in that regard, they're not very picky eaters, but they just need the quantity of these kind of small little fish species. How do they scoop down? Well, they basically swoop to the water surface and grab it right at the surface. There's also plunge dive, and that basically means that it can be possible for the whole body to be submerged underneath the water surface. That's possible, but they're way off when it comes to diving. Okay, so they're not great divers. The puffins, in comparison, that's where they're really shining. They basically turn into prime penguins underneath the water surface. Very clumsy in the air, and that's because they are much more heavy. They're a lot. Their body weight is just way too heavy to sustain long flights. But basically, the Arctic terns, they're much better to adapt to a life on the wing rather than when it comes to diving. But yeah, that's what they need to do. Pray a lot. What I often see in Iceland on whale watching tours is something incredible. They make use of whales, basically showing them where the fish is. Basically, the whales, let's have a look at them, and that makes much more sense. So here we have some humpback whales, 3 of them at the same time, and you can see something. I'm not going to get into the details about the whales, but you can see them basically bubble net feeding. You know it from Alaska, you know it from Pacific places, but it's very, very rare or very new in Iceland, a coordinated bubble net feeding attempt. But what you can see here besides that is a whole bunch of birds. And why is that? Well, because of this bubble net and because of the whales chasing the fish, basically all that fish comes to the surface in the panic, trying to avoid the predation and the attack by the whales. And as they are at the surface, they'll get very easy prey for a lot of seabirds. So for example, here we not only have Arctic terns, in fact, the majority of birds is probably black kittiwakes and also some black-backed gulls. But you can see basically they make use of it. They have the eyes perspective. They see first where the whale is going to come back up. They wait for the fish to panic and come to the surface, and they say thank you to these whales. So often we see that, and it makes for quite a show, kind of like a BBC documentary when we think about it. So, excuse me. Let's get into the migration here for a little bit and really dive into it ourselves because this is the one feature that is so special. It's the longest migration of any animal on the planet that I can tell you. It's the biggest round trip of any animal migration. So this should be on top of your head when you think about animal migration. And how it happens, basically at the end of July, beginning of August, they almost take off simultaneously within a few days. So the whole colony, no matter how big it is, just starts migrating basically at the same point. And it probably has to do with their circadian rhythm, right? With their clock telling them, okay, the days are getting shorter, it's time for us to leave. But also with prey availability dropping probably around that stage after most of the birds have fledged and now they're going on their way. But Thomas will be one of these individuals, and he will take a different path, even when he's with Tanya. So both of them will decide individually rather than as a community or as a flock. So that means it's not genetically fixed. Every single individual depends on finding out their own route, finding a different route for themselves. And we will look at that in a second, how that looks on the map. But for us, important to know, it's not genetically fixed. It's not a program that they just do. The young ones, when Thomas was a very young bird, he needed to leave after just about 3 weeks, and there was no way to find the exact path, the exact route. It's always a try and error, trying out different routes. Once they've established a route, however, that's when they stick to it, for worse or for better. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Because if you think this is kind of an evolutionary benefit, if you want, because if they would all take the same route, they might end up in very, very bad conditions all at the same time. And that might mean a complete population crash, population decline. And that's really something they want to avoid, right? Not they, but evolution maybe programmed them to avoid that. And so they are more open in their approach to finding out these routes. And so when some of them follow the South American coast, others will be on the South African coast. And while that year might be in particular in bad conditions, the other one is in really good conditions. So that population or that flock will still survive and will return and continue the community. So it does make a lot of sense. When we talk about how they find these routes, though, it's very, let's say, I would like to give you an easy answer. Yes, it's magnetoreception, and it probably is, right? But there's a lot more. There's a whole combination of innate directional programs, a whole different lots of factors that play into that. For example, it might also have to do with the position of the sun, right? Because they have this circadian rhythm, this circadian clock inside of them, telling them, okay, the days are getting shorter, the sun is at that time, at that position, so they know where to go. Once they find some landmarks, they can navigate around them. They find some hotspots or feeding grounds, and they will come back and recognize them again. So there's different kinds of things that help them to navigate. But certainly, like most other long distance travelers or migrators, they certainly make use of magnetoreception. And I'm not going to go into the details about that, but it has to actually do something with the eyes. So just to keep in mind, it's pretty cool. So let's go through that. So at the end of July, actually, we're gonna go rather quickly around that one, just to look at the map much better, much more visual. So basically, Iceland right in the middle of the map, just above the UK and underneath Greenland. And you can see that's at the end of the breeding range of the Arctic terns is very, very large, right? We see that here. There's a lot of different breeding colonies all over the places and very remote. So also keep in mind, this is fairly new research, fairly new, because there were some ring studies, right? We could say, okay, we have a ringed bird and we see it again, but finding it again and again on the route where it mostly travels on offshore far enough for us to never see them again when they're off the water, and then coming back to Iceland the year after, that doesn't tell us something about the route, right? Now we have very tiny little geotags that are not disturbing, not invasive for the animal. And so these are the ones that help us and shed light on the migration routes. And so take this with a grain of salt, because this is quite fairly recent studies. A lot more has to be done. The sample sizes are pretty new. So let's see how many more routes we find or what kind of conclusion we come to. But for now, let's see that basically they all migrate south from Iceland, migrate through the Atlantic Ocean, and then they come to the west coast of Africa. And then there's kind of a split. So I talked about some deciding to go to South America, along the east coast of South America. Others will follow the west coast of South Africa, basically circle the Cape of Good Hopes and spend some time even migrating further east towards Australia before finally circling down towards the Antarctic Sea and the ice. And so that's going to take a long time. So let's say 3 to 4 months for one way down and a little bit less on the way up. Here we have a little bit more of a detailed study, this time from a population that started in the UK We can see basically they started at the end of July in 2015. And what we call the first staging area is that they not do this as a direct flight, right? So they have different stages and they stay somewhere for weeks in an area just to relax, just to refresh, to hunt. There might be a lot of good prey. They feed on it, they make use of it, and then they continue their journey. We can see the first staging area in October 2015, the second one in early November 2015, and then they stay close to the Weddell Sea around February, March. And even some of them might arrive earlier if they took the shortcut from South Africa, or if they come from South America, they probably arrive there around December before they make up their way back in March. And so from another study from Greenland and Iceland terns, it was covered, they covered 22,000 miles one way, and that's 44,000 miles in a year. That's a maximum of 50,000 miles. Wow. I can't believe this, and maybe you feel the same way, because that is just so incredible, so unique. It's very special. Absolutely pointing it out that they don't use a straight line, as we have established already. They have a quite of a convoluted route, and they take their time to go there. So it's not a single stop journey. It's kind of taking weeks and weeks to cover that distance. On the way back, they will be a little bit quicker. They do that maybe in 90 days, maybe 2 months. So March, they arrive end of April back in Iceland. You can see this kind of turnaround S shape. So they make use of the prevailing winds. In this case, it's often trade winds. That's why they're a little bit faster also on the way back up. Also because time is running out, because the breeding season is very short, right? How are they able to do this? That is a really good question, right? That's for us is an incredible feature that we couldn't do, that no other animal can do. So how are they able to do that? Well, it is because they are superbly adapted to life on the wing and at sea, and they have something called unihemispheric sleep. So you might have, if you have been on a whale watching tour, you've also heard about this one, because the whales utilize the same system. It's basically one half of the brain is active and awake, while the other one is just enough sleeping to get some rest, right? And so basically what it allows the bird, in this case, also swifts, for example, to keep on flying staying in the air, even though they are half sleeping. So they're just conscious enough to stay in the air. Their awareness of obstacles and such will not be very strong. We see that with whales, actually, because they're doing the same, because they're mammals that need to come to the surface to breathe. They will use the same method, but basically because their perception of dangers around them is inhibited by that. There's a lot of crashes with boats and fishing vessels because of that, because they're basically half asleep while they're coming up to the surface, while they continue to just float around. And the same is true for the birds, but just there's not so much up there, no fishing vessels up in the air. They utilize the flying forage strategy, and we talked about the very lightweight, right? And so we talked about the ratio of the wingspan towards the body size, and so they are really good at gliding efficiently, and that of course reduces the energy costs drastically and makes them able to stay in the air for weeks with just really short rests. For example, they land and float on ocean surfaces. We talked about the staging areas where they stay for sometimes some weeks even, but basically that is taken with a bit of salt as well, because they're much more prone to bad weather conditions here, just waves hitting them around, drowning them even. Or it might be the case that there's more predation from underneath, right? There might be some sharks, some bigger fish that prey on these birds, and so that's just why there's when they're floating on the surface of the water. But in summary, when we talk about the migration, you could say that these Arctic terns, they're addicted to summer, kind of like my mother, right? I mean, always going to these beautiful places with a lot of sunshine. That's my mom, totally my mom. My mom is an Arctic tern. Just figured that out. And the other thing, as you could say that Iron Maiden style, probably their inspiration for their Fear of the Dark album, right? Because these Arctic terns, they see more daylight than any other creature on the planet. And that's because you got to imagine they basically stay in the Arctic summers of Iceland, right? 24 hours of daylight up here, almost 24 hours, and then they migrate south. There's a little bit around the equator, they might see some darkness, maybe even some stars, right? But then they come to the Antarctic when it's their summertime, and then they get 24 hours of almost daylight. So yeah, the Arctic tern gets more daylight than any other creature on the planet. That's just amazing. And probably it's because they are afraid of the dark, right? No other explanation there, right? Or is there? Because the question is, should I stay or should I go? And this is a really good question because we actually have an equivalent species, let's say, and that's the Antarctic tern. Yeah, there's such a thing. And this one evolved in the southern hemisphere. And the biggest difference here is that food, even in the off month, let's say in Antarctic winter, is still relatively available. So there are still some hotspots, there's still some good enough food sources so they can stay down there all year round. So the Antarctic birds, the Antarctic terns, this is by the way in the photo is one, they are not making these long distance travels. They stay, they make use of the Antarctic summer to breed, and then in the winter they just float around. They might go to some different places in Antarctica, but they mostly stay within. While we have our beautiful Arctic terns, and they are basically going all the way, right? Because probably they've evolved in the northern hemisphere where the winters are very unproductive, and that kind of forced them to a very drastic survival strategy, and that's to go south, to go very far south. And so these Arctic terns, they capitalize on both environments at their most productive times, right? So that's, as you can imagine, in the summer, there's this constant light, these constant daylight during these summer months, and we have nutrient-rich cold waters, usually close to the poles. For example, in Iceland, we have the East Greenland current that comes up, pushes. That's why the water is so murky, right? That's because there's a lot of phytoplankton, and phytoplankton is a fabulous food source for tiny little zooplankton, right? Small little animals that feed on the phytoplankton, and basically that kicks off the whole food chain, right? With very small fish feeding on the zooplankton, smaller fish feeding on that smaller fish or some crustaceans, and so it kicks off. There's a whole feeding bonanza for our Arctic terns, but not just for our Arctic terns, also for whales, for seals, for all kinds of bird life also, right? So that's what it means. That's why they're traveling, because their winters up in the north are very unproductive. So they see themselves forced to migrate south. And here again, they find themselves in the richness of the Antarctic summer, the Austral summer, you could say. Basically, this is an Arctic tern in its winter plumage. So you're never going to see that one unless you go to Antarctica. And this is basically our only way to easily distinguish them, right? Because when you are down south in Antarctic summer, then you get the Antarctic tern in its summer plumage, in its breeding plumage, because that's when they breed. But the Arctic tern, because it's just coming from its breeding season in the north, will change and mold and into the winter plumage, looking very, very different. So then it's quite easy to tell them apart. Otherwise, it's a bit tricky. The Arctic tern has more black wing tips that you could tell. The legs are supposedly a little bit more stocky and smaller. You can see that here maybe a little bit, but yeah, it's going to be really hard to tell them apart in the field. Luckily, that never happens because one of them is not going to be in breeding plumage. So what we can say also is that the migratory cycle is annual and hardwired, even if the breeding is skipped. So it's just so crucial to their survival that is the only program that is hardwired, that is innate in them, that is integrated, that they travel, even if the conditions are so poor within their breeding colony that they can't breed. That might happen. Out of 3 years, they might only do it once or twice. You know, there's a little bit of flexibility when it comes to that, because it's just wasted energy if the food conditions are not good to raise offspring. We talked about the fledging success and how low it is in general, and it will be even worse in low prey availability years. So it's really tough. And there's one exception, of course. This is also what we talked about. Thomas, in his very young ages, when he just learned how to fly south, he's going to stay there until he can participate in the breeding himself. He's going to stay down south just to skip that, to gather more experience, to find the best places, and then finally in his 3 or 4 years that's when he's going to come back up. So going back to Thomas, and now we understand the migration a little bit more, right? Hopefully a lot more, actually, a lot better. Longest migration going all the way from the Arctic to Antarctica to spend the summer, to spend Antarctic summer down there, come back to Arctic summer and doing it all over again. And so basically we could say this is the secret of a happy marriage, of any happy marriage, right? It's a long time apart. And yes, Tanya and Thomas are no exception when it comes to that. They basically do their duties, they raise kids, and then they say goodbye to each other. They might start at the same stage, but eventually they split up, they find their own individual routes. And even though they might be in the same staging areas, remember, these are still vast stretches of ocean. And so within thousands of kilometers, there might be a large colony, but it's so spread out that it's highly unlikely. And geolocator studies have shown that it's in fact not happening, that they see each other. So they only reunite again at the colony in springtime when they are back in Iceland around the end of April. Okay, so that's basically how they do it, spending a lot of time. Site fidelity might be the most important thing here. They are very loyal to the sites where they're being born, so to their breeding colony, and they will find that exact place again, similar to puffins and frogs. So it might be that they're more loyal to the property here. Oh my God, this is my breeding ground, so it must be you, my partner. Okay, probably also not the whole story. There's a lot of vocal and behavioral recognition. There might be some things going on we don't understand yet. For example, in the puffins, the beaks are actually bioluminescent, and that means under the UV light, they will shine up. I'm not sure. I haven't found anything about any studies having conducted with these Arctic terns, but it wouldn't be a surprise if there was other things that we are missing, how they recognize each other. But in fact, they recognize each other. It's well established that they're monogamous and that they're going back to their same mate. That has been conducted in the 80s already. Okay, so yes, happy marriage, my God. Tanya and Thomas happily reunited, having more babies, and hopefully they will continue to do so throughout the years. Tricky bit is that it's not always so romantic like a Disney movie, unfortunately. In fact, divorce is quite common, and that makes a lot of sense. If actually for a Helgoland colony where this was studied, it might be up to 1/3 of the Tern couples that go through a divorce. Yeah, sad reality. In general, we might go to about 20%. And if we want to see some trends in that, it's true that older couples, usually older individuals that have long established pair bonds, they are more likely to stay monogamous and stay with each other rather than young, inexperienced birds that will choose a new partner. Kind of like in humans as well, right? So divorce rate in Arctic terns, you could argue, is still much better than in human societies at this point. So yeah, although good for them. And in the sense of the Arctic terns, I have to say it makes a lot of sense, right? Because think about it this way: there's a very short breeding window, right? Only a very short time for their breeding to take place, right? It's just a short summer, Arctic summer. So we're talking about 3 months here. If you arrive already and you're tapping your fingers because you're waiting for your partner, but Tanya is just not showing up, anything could have happened out there for her, right? 8 months at sea is a long time. She could have died, or she just, anything could have happened. So he cannot wait. He doesn't want to lose this chance. So Thomas is in a kind of a dilemma here. And eventually the programming is so strong. It's a preference for reproductive opportunity rather than strict loyalty. So at some point, the whole courtship behavior will start again. He will try to get attention of a new mate, and they will start a new brood. So that might happen. But now the critical question: what happens? Oh my God, imagine this. Tanya just got held up. Oh my God, there was a traffic jam on the highway up to the Atlantic Ocean, or who knows? Just a family visit, and you know how grandma is. I couldn't say goodbye to her. That could happen, right? But now, okay, here's the fact: she's late to the party, and poor Thomas has found a new partner already. What is happening now? Well, bad luck for Tanya. She's out of luck. She will be, as an intruder to the new nest site, will be chased away and will be not being able to go back to Thomas. So Thomas will have to be with the new partner and stick to that, and hopefully get some new offspring for her. That's what matters for them. It's about breeding success in a very, very short breeding season, right? That otherwise wouldn't happen and would decrease their survival even more. So yeah, Arctic terns in Iceland. Thomas, Kria is the name, and it kind of is a verbal thing, right? Because if you think about it, I might imitate it. Kria, Kria. Um, Maybe you've heard it. It wasn't very accurate, but check it out. It's a kind of a nice sound, and that's the name of for the Arctic terns in Icelandic. And basically, they're a harbinger of spring, just like the very famous golden plover or lua, as they are called in Icelandic. And so when you see them, it's a good sign. It's a hate-love relationship because you see them and you know, oh God, the days are finally getting longer again. Summer is around the corner. So it's a really good sign. But on the other hand, golfing is going to be more challenging again. And yeah, you might just find yourself being swamped and attacked by these Arctic terns that are everywhere by May and June, you know, when they're really starting to sit on the nests and trying to incubate their eggs. A very interesting history here, though, in Iceland, because as you can imagine, Iceland being this very scarce place with not a lot of resources, right? So it was always about survival. That's what we have to keep in mind when we judge on our modern standards, because they ate them, they used them for the feathers, and they also utilize the eggs, right? Because it's an easily available protein source when they find them along the beaches, just grabbing them, catching them. The meat was actually not so preferred. They preferred guillemots and puffins much more than Arctic terns, but it was a protein source, if you want to call it that way. But something interesting happened. The bird, because of the rapid decline, as you can imagine, heavy exploitation, collecting the eggs, eating the meat, being so easily accessible around the islands, it's very, very challenging, and the drop was very heavy and very quick. So the Arctic terns became fully protected in Iceland, but in 1882, and that's one of the earliest laws for bird protection in the whole world. So very special, and it wasn't just to protect the Arctic terns, but also the eider ducks. Okay, eider ducks is very special things in Iceland. You've maybe heard about eider downs. Eider downs is a very expensive material, the best to insulate. So the royals used to sleep in bedding made with eider downs. Now it's used for Mount Everest expedition when you think about sleeping gear and stuff like that. So it's just a very high quality material. And the eider ducks, they pluck out their own feathers to feather or make the bed, make the nest. And once the breeding is done, the farmer just collects these feathers, and so it's a very sustainable relationship and practice. The farmer is protecting these eider ducks because they're coming back as well. Now, if you imagine an Arctic tern colony around eider ducks, that's basically the perfect alarm system or predator deterrent system, because they will just swoop down and attack everything. So the farmers are quite happy when Arctic terns are around their eider duck colonies. Okay, so, and that's the reason also why they got protected so early in 1882, to protect the eider ducks a little bit more from invaders like Arctic foxes. So historically, the Iceland supports about 20 to 30% of the world's breeding Arctic terns. And we will just have a quick look here on the map where these is. You can see the concentration is more towards the west and the north of Iceland. That's because that's where the prey availability is. We get the green Iceland coming from Greenland, so from the west, hitting Iceland actually towards the west and the south. But in the south, we have a different factor, and that's the glacial outburst floods, right? So we have outwash plains, not really suitable habitat, because if you've seen it, you know it's changing every single year. It's changing with the floods, so it's very unstable habitat. Whereas in the north and west, we have these fjords established. There's not much erosion going on anymore because it's far away from the volcanic systems. So basically, it's much more better for them to land here. And we can see them at different places during our tours in Iceland. For example, we see them down in Dyrhólaey. That's the most southernmost spot. Even when you walk around Reykjavik, which is just on the southwest, you can see them there already. And we also see them closer to the glacier. We see them in Glacier Lagoon, for example. We can see them at Jökulsárlón, where we go on a zodiac ride. So there are different spots throughout the trip where we can see. And if we know that now that you are seeing this webinar, you are particularly curious about them, we might make some extra stops for you to take some nice photos, because there are some really nice opportunities to do so. We talked about Iceland holding about one 150,000 pairs, 200,000 pairs, so about 20% or 30% of the whole population, and that's about 2 million individuals. But we also talked about how difficult it is to estimate that correctly, right? Because we have this huge breeding range within the northern hemisphere, even in remote places like Siberia, East Russia. So it's really hard to get a good estimate. But one thing is certain, and that's that the population trend is decreasing, and that it's going quickly. And even though it's still listed by the IUCN as a species of least concern, in Iceland it's already listed as a vulnerable species since 2018, and many European countries where they are is actually following that because they're dropping so quickly. And it has to do with the sand eels. The sand eels, sand lancers in 2005, basically there was a complete population crash. We're not exactly sure what caused it. There's definitely, in this case, commercial fishing might just be a side effect or a side factor, let's say. They are not actually being commercially fished for, but we do have the trawlers destroying their habitat, right? But the biggest thing might be here because of climate change. Okay, the warmer the water, it's bad for the sand lancers, the sand eels, because they're cold-loving water species, and so their range will reach further north and north, while other species, for example, mackerel, will be able to come into the southern reaches, and that's where they will prey heavily on sand lancers, depriving all these other species of their preferred main prey, and that's the sand lance. And so the Arctic terns are suffering from that as well, and finding themselves in a place where they are loyal to their breeding colonies, but these breeding colonies are more and more outside of range, out of range of these high productive areas where a lot of sand lance and other smaller fish are available. So that's going to be a big issue for the future. The WWF that supports our work, and you also as a guest coming on these trips also support their work, is to identify these areas where there's these highly productive areas, and to guard and protect these marine habitats in the ocean where they breed and feed. And so you're doing a really good. There are some initiatives like ArcNet and the Arctic Biodiversity Initiative where the WWF takes place as well. So you are directly and indirectly supporting these initiatives with your money, with your help when you come and travel with us. So really good to know. Of course, it's not always easy to end on such a sad note, knowing that the population is basically decreasing quickly. In some places, it's up to 20%. And so I don't want to end on that one because there's a lot of awe. There can be still a lot be done. And I want to just help to protect the species by showing you how incredible they are. And so in this case, it should be a celebration of a bird that represents resilience, stamina, and strong will to protect what's good and precious, even in the face of much greater forces bigger than yourself. And so, yeah, with that, I just want to tell you something more awesome facts. The Arctic tern is a very long-lived species, so the average might be around 20 years. Some individuals even 25. The record is, I think, 34 years. So repeatedly going back, doing that circle all over again, going from Arctic to Antarctica every single year for 30 years. And in that case, Thomas, our beautiful tern that we learned so much about and that we appreciate so much, basically travels 1.5 million miles within his lifetime. And that's just more than 3.5 round trips to the moon and back. So it's just, yeah, I'm out of words to describe that performance by such a little unspectacular bird if you see it. And yeah, the record individual nearly traveled 60,000 miles, or 2 times the circumference of the Earth. And as we've seen, they're aggressive but very protective parents and terns. They fight off polar bears. They're not afraid of anything. And with that, I want to say thank you and thank you for your attention. And I would be so happy to show you these Arctic terns on one of our trips. You can see here Julie. I hope you're watching this, Julie. She was on one of our photo expedition trips this summer. And we just got out of basically our van and our sprinter, and we came out and we were at this lovely cafe local, and right next to the cafe was a breeding colony of Arctic terns, and you can see how this ended. There, there were a lot of attacks, but you can see even the spark and the awe and the inspiration in Julie's face. That's why I love this photo. It was just so cool to see them and to come really, really close, almost too close to them. And so I hope you will get the same impression and have a little bit of more awe and understanding for these wonderful creatures. Thank you so much for your attention. Tack för det. And if you have any questions, I'm here.
All right, thank you, Daniel. So before we dive into the question section, I'd like to remind everyone that if you do have questions, you can submit them in the question field in your control panel. You see those 3 lines in the upper right-hand corner. Go ahead and click on those and put your questions in the question field. So, Daniel, do the terns, do they sleep at all during their migration?
Yes, they do. But like I said, when we go back to that analogy with the brains of humpback whales, for example, or all whales, they use unihemispheric sleep. So it's not sleep in the sense like we do it, right? 8 hours laying down, deep sleep phases and stuff like that. They will sleep, but even when they're in the air, they will sleep enough by having constantly one brain half sleeping and the other one being aware, just to navigate that and keeping them flying in the air. But there's definitely some sleeping in the way. There's definitely some sleep involved, just not in the way that we think of sleep.
Wow, that's pretty cool how they have.
Yeah. That would be a skill to have, huh? Multitasking and listening to some things and then shutting off with one half brain and still resting. That would be a good skill to have.
Absolutely. Probably would have gotten me through college, right?
Yeah, right, exactly.
So what elevation do the terns fly at? And do you know if there's been any studies about them that maybe would help the airline industry or rockets?
Well, that's a great question. I have to be honest with you that I'm not sure about the exact elevation, because I'm very aware and sure that it's very variable, right? It depends on where the wind conditions are best, but certainly it's no problem for at least commercial airline traffic, because that's just much higher in the altitude. We're not talking about geese that are able to fly over Mount Everest in altitude. We're just still in the lower. But very good question. I will have to check out the exact numbers on that one.
Can they float on the water?
Yes, absolutely. Especially in these staging areas that we said, right? When they're on their way south, that's where they have different hotspots, feeding hotspots, you could say, where they will stay, where they will rest, and where they will just swoop around and float at the ocean surface just to rest, just to feed along the water surface. That's certainly something that they will do. But it's not like the puffins. When the puffins disappear for the winter, they will just float around the ocean and they will go through molt and they will basically be flightless for up to 2 months, completely flightless. The Arctic terns are not like that. They have a goal in mind. They are very much adapted to a life in the air. And so these periods when they're floating on the water surface are just much shorter and just occasional rather than the rule.
Gotcha. Thank you. So what percentage of the terns actually return? What is the survival rate?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. It's quite high, right? So we talked about the fledgling success, and that's very low, right? We talked about maybe 0.5 offspring per couple, even less so in very unproductive years. So 0.5 is the range that I found. But the survival rate is actually very high once they came out of that successfully. It's about 82%, 87% even in cases. So that's a very high survival rate. You could call them K-selected in that case. So very much more about quality and then about quantity of offspring. It's about them surviving and then having a very long life. Like I said, almost 30 years old, in some record cases even 31, 34 years old. So just about my age. So incredible for a species that flies back to the moon and back.
Wow, great. So do we know what came first, the Arctic tern or the Antarctic tern?
Yeah, that's a great question. Probably there was a simultaneous happening. You know, all the tern species evolving from one ancestor tern, and then they're being divided and separated by who knows what, probably different areas where they couldn't penetrate anymore. Speciation happens right when space is divided and there's no gene flow between the populations anymore. So that must have happened at least for sufficiently a long time that they could speciate, that they could become different species with different behaviors before they started to interact each other again in Antarctica, but on a very different level.
And how well do they coexist?
Sorry?
How well do they get along? They coexist well?
Yeah, well, like I said, right? So when we said about the Weddell Sea, right? The Weddell Sea is close to Antarctica, it's right there. And this should be a major interesting hotspot. So when we talk about ocean protection, that should definitely be one. That's where they intermix, that's where they interact also, but in the sense that they do get along, there's not much competition, and because it's a vast area and millions of seabirds are spread out, it's just a truly hot spot for the activity, and there's nothing bad going on.
So what is the best time of year for me to go to Iceland to actually be able to see the terns?
Yeah, that's a bit tricky because basically by the end of July, even early August, most of them will be gone already. So you could say that probably in the further north, they might still stick around a little bit longer, but it's very difficult to say exactly when. For example, this year they were left quite early, so there's definitely some yearly fluctuation as well. So if you want to be really sure, be there in June, be there at the beginning of July, but towards the end of July and certainly beginning of August, that's when it gets a bit tricky. But just during the Icelandic summer, that's when you're guaranteed to see them. Unfortunately, when you see Arctic terns, you can be almost certain that there's no chance of seeing northern lights. Same is true with puffins. If you see puffins, there's no chance for northern lights. So you kind of have to come back to Iceland twice, or you have to choose based on your preference what you choose, the animals like puffins and Arctic terns, or the northern lights, which are going to be later in the year.
Well, that would make for a very hard choice, I think.
Yes, indeed.
What's your next adventure, Daniel?
My next adventure is going to be the Congo. So actually in about 2 weeks, I'm going to the Congo, where I'm guiding on a river cruise boat. Unfortunately, that's not with NetHub. It's just a very new project, and I'm very excited to be helping as part of the team as kind of a bridge to help the local Congolese guides to adapt to our, let's say, Western travel standard. So I'm super excited about that, and yeah, we'll be happy to spread some more awe and inspiration there.
Great. Well, thanks for letting us know that, Daniel. And thank you so much for taking the time to present for us today. I'd like to throw it back to you now if you have any closing comments you'd like to give us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm so happy, Rob. I'm always a bit nervous about these webinars, I have to say, because talking to myself in the camera is kind of weird. But I hope that my excitement came across, and that you love these little birds a little bit more just because of this presentation. They're truly wonderful animals, and I hope you get to see them should you decide to travel with us.
Daniel, you were terrific, and we really appreciate it. Lots of compliments in the question field. So
that's wonderful.
Great.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate your time today, Daniel. And I also like to thank everyone who tuned in today.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you guys are interested in information on how you can travel to Iceland with NatHab, please give us a call at 800-543-8917, or you can send us an email at info@nathab.com. Our adventure specialists are happy to help you out. Join us tomorrow for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Time.
Bye-bye.